Pirmā prezentācija – globālā vides un sociālā biznesa nevalstiskās organizācijas ar bagātu pieredzi inovatīvu finansēšanu pieeja jomā. Dibinātājs un direktors ir mūsu nākamais viesis, un tas ir Adrians Balači. Sagaidām Adrianu. Adrian, welcome to the stage. And if you wonder what I said in Latvian, only the best things. So there's a clicker if you need.
Okay.
Yeah, and you can watch the monitors for your presentation.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here. It's my first time in Riga. I've been many times to the Baltics, but it's usually Tallinn. So I'm really grateful that Mājoklis has invited me to give you a presentation of the current European situation. I'm not going to detail necessarily everything that is happening in Europe because it's very complicated, and in any case, there is too much data to fill in 15 minutes presentation. And I'm going to try to keep my time so other speakers have their own turn. So, I'm just going to say a few words about who we are. We are a business development company. We created ourselves some 20 years ago. We became 20 years old in June this year. And our first types of business that was launched in Hungary 20 years ago was the introduction of what back then was not known as a one-stop shop, but is now known as a one-stop shop. With the main difference is that a one-stop shop in Hungary didn't mean a place or an organization or a team that are employed by the state or by a regional authority or by a local authority. It's completely market-based, and it's usually SME companies, so small and medium-sized companies. Since then, we have expanded quite a lot. Now we are doing a lot of work in geopolitical risk assessment, in supply chain security. For example, a lot of people might not know, but energy efficiency technology in Europe is slowly but very surely being overtaken by products that are coming from outside of Europe. And that's a really big problem for a lot of companies that work here and that employ people here. And so we are doing a lot of study there. We are also studying the effects of public subsidies. When are they good? When are they bad? When do they encourage people to do more innovation? When do they encourage people to abuse the system? And so over the past 20 years, we did a lot of different types of work that is related to energy efficiency, renewable energy in the buildings, security, supply chain security, and so on. So the reason I got invited to this conference is to tell you broadly this picture, which is that, and this is not my number, that about 10% of the costs are covered or are going to be covered by public funds at the European level. And that's a really big problem because we simply do not have the money to renovate everything that needs to be renovated. And then in 20 years' time or 30 years' time, we will have to start renovating the buildings that were built in the 90s and early 2000s because they might be more efficient than something that we built in the 60s, but they are not that efficient. And they are getting old. And so there are many, many different risks associated to what is going to come right now. And one of the biggest ones is inflation, that it seems to be persistent. Everything is much more expensive today than it was 5 years ago. And in Hungary, for example, the costs of renovations have doubled first, around 2019, 2021. And then since then, it's like 2.5 or triple compared to like 15 years ago. Yeah, so everything is much more expensive. Yeah, let me see if I remember what this slide is. Oh yes, the public finance part. Yes, so the public finance part is yes, there are limitations to what you can do with public finance. Public finance should be capped and this is something that we have been studying very seriously in the past 10 years, should be kept at what we call budget neutrality. Yeah? We are not the only ones that are studying public budget neutrality. There are colleagues in Estonia and in other places that are looking at this idea that when you are supporting something with public cash, that is with taxpayers' money, that cash should return to you through the public budget, through the work that it creates, the employment that it creates, the VAT, etc. And across the board, in the European countries that we have evaluated in some of our research, it shows, I'm going to talk about later, that there is an ideal amount, more or less, for what public budget neutrality means. Yes, this is the private finance part. Private finance, as we saw from the numbers from the European Commission, will have to cover 90% of the investment. And this investment can come from many different places. In Hungary, it comes mostly from own savings. That is, before buildings start refurbishment, they start saving. Sometimes for 1 year, for 2 years. Some buildings have been saving for 5 or even 10 years. So by the time they start doing refurbishment, they are already having a lot of the costs covered in their own budget. And then they tend to use commercial loans. And commercial loans are available in many Central and Eastern European countries. Not necessarily in the West, which is a very strange paradox. I'm going to show you an English example of how commercial loans that are targeted at multi-apartment buildings are either non-existent or they are extremely expensive commercial loans. And how difficult it was, for example, to explain to the English that when you are financing a block of flats, you cannot use mortgage credit to do that, yeah? Because the refurbishment is very small. For a bank, it's a very small volume, etc., and it doesn't make sense. So there are different kinds of financial products currently for energy efficiency in Europe. Some of them are better designed, some of them are worse. The smarter ones use public finance to leverage private finance, and they do this through guarantees, first loss guarantees, pari passu guarantees, and so on. And sometimes they involve interest rate subsidies and so on. That is to reduce the cost that you have to pay back to the bank. And I'm going to show you 2 projects from Hungary, which are quite interesting. And I'm going to show you from Hungary because Hungary is similar to Estonia in that a very large proportion of the population lives in multi-apartment buildings. In England, only 22% people live in multi-apartment buildings. Everybody else lives in semi-detached, detached, or this kind of weird conglomerate of family houses. Yeah? So they are not multi-apartment buildings. But in Hungary, I think it's something similar to here, which is around 70–80% of people live in multi-apartment buildings. So that's one of the reasons I'm going to show you this, because multi-apartment buildings were the first target for energy efficiency in Hungary, and we started working on this subject already in the 90s as a country. It was not me, but it was one of my colleagues. Her name is Dobirosa Aniko, and she was the first one that started introducing energy efficiency finance specifically for multi-apartment buildings that departs from mortgage loans and also departs from expensive consumer loans. Yeah. So I'm going to go to the next one. And this is challenges. Yes, thank you. Yes, so challenges. There are lots of challenges. For example, currently I'm working in Bulgaria, which is a very particular example, and I'm going to show you what that means. In Bulgaria, the only energy efficiency that they have ever done is done with a 100% grant. So there is a very limited amount of buildings because they have very little money. Everyone has very little money. And if you waste it entirely on one building, then everybody else doesn't get from the pot. And it's very difficult to explain to Bulgarians why giving 100% grants to private property owners, out of which at least half of them are most definitely not energy poor on any level. Some of them have 2, 3, 5 apartments in a single buildings where that receive 100% grant, and how problematic this is and how to solve it. And energy efficiency in multi-apartment buildings, but in general, it's a collective action problem. What is a collective action problem? A collective action problem is that whenever you have more than one person making decisions, you have to come to some sort of agreement. And in Hungary, naturally, we are using, at least on this level, we are extremely democratic. We are using a very democratic system to solve collective action problems. And yes, the other reason I got invited is to show where Latvia, Estonia, and other countries in the region and outside of the region, yes, stand in rates of renovation. And as you can see, the yellow-green color is from the total multi-apartment stock that we found from official statistics, or my colleagues did. And the other one is from what your government and Lithuania's governments and Estonia's governments deemed in need of refurbishment. So, yeah, we tend to look at both of them because the first number is not always true in many countries, because a lot of those buildings that some governments say that, okay, we don't need to refurbish because these are new, they are not so good. Yeah? They are not very high quality built. And even those that were built in the last 20 years are not necessarily the best. And sometimes you have these building companies doing lots of ugly things, and the outcome is not very efficient homes. So the reason why I showed you this is for you to get an idea of where you stay in the Baltic region. But I have to say that there are some differences, for example, in the case of Estonia and Lithuania, because it's true that Estonians did fewer projects per building stock, but they are also overly ambitious. Yeah, so they do everything. And even when it doesn't necessarily make financial sense to do everything. And they add all kinds of extra refurbishment and retrofit ideas to buildings. And I have been having a discussion with the Swedbank that is operating in Estonia, and they were telling me that they also have the same issue, because when they are issuing a loan, they issue loan based on the expected cost reduction, and that cost reduction should cover hopefully everything and should lower your monthly bills after the refurbishment. But this is not necessarily true, because the more topics you add on top of energy efficiency, then it came balconies, then it came, I don't know, gardens, then it sounds very nice, but it always takes away from the payback. So it increases the payback period. Instead of you being able to pay back your loan in 5 or 10 years, you will have to pay it back in 20 years. So you gain less from the investment. So I just wanted to clarify that in this case. Yes, I wanted to show you a few other cases, just because, for you to get an idea of the fact that everyone is struggling, even the best starts are struggling, even those that have done many, many, many more buildings as a percentage of the building stock and in total numbers compared to you, even they are struggling. Here I'm highlighting the UK because in the case of the UK, I'm not looking at multi-apartment buildings, so that chart doesn't show multi-apartment building, it's UK or residential buildings, because like I said, in the UK, only 22% of people live in multi-apartment buildings. And I also highlighted the UK because that 30% should be taken with a lot of salt, in the sense that about half of it is extremely light intervention. Only about 15% would be something of the same quality that you would get in Estonia or Hungary in energy efficiency intervention. In Bulgaria, as you can see, they are at the very beginning, and this little thing there down, yeah, that's 100% grant, everything they did there. They did a few thousand buildings, and in the past 15 years, 16 years, very few buildings, and everything was done with full grant from EU cash and national cash. So, yes, I wanted to highlight the Hungarian case because the Hungarian case is very, it's not entirely unique, but it's very unique in the sense that it's a country in Central Eastern European region. It's not a very rich country. It was occupied by Moscow until 1993. We were not part of the Soviet Empire, but we were occupied until 1993. So we were under a communist regime. We were not rich. And when we started doing energy efficiency in 1995, and then more strongly after 2005, it was very difficult at the beginning to convince people that they need energy efficiency or why this is a good idea, etc. And we had, compared to other countries, less support. Yeah? So we had some subsidies, we had some support from local authorities, but pretty much everything that you see here is done by the market. So it's done by the people themselves, the owner, the housing association managers, the one-stop shop companies like ourselves that is go after the projects and try to create a good refurbishment project for each client, by the banks. In Hungary, the banks were extremely and are still extremely active. For example, since 2010, there are no public funds whatsoever for multi-apartment buildings, but the banks keep issuing loans. And that higher margin is the prefabricated kind of blocks. And in those, we reached a very high level because people that live in these prefabricated blocks were the most enthusiastic about doing energy efficiency, and were also the easiest to convince because these buildings were extremely inefficient. Yeah, the old types of brick buildings that were built in the 19th century, those are much more efficient in Hungary because they have extremely thick walls, and the whole structure, the way they were built, it was much more efficient. So, I ran out of time. So I'm going to stop here, and then you can ask me a question if you want. Bulgaria started from 0, and in 5 years, we are still very close to 0, just saying. And I'm going to this is the type of projects that we were supporting in the UK, just for you to see a few pictures. It's because multi-apartment buildings are not such a big part of the population, like I said. This is the kind of projects that we did in Hungary. I'm sure that the organizers will give you the presentation. I know you're going to upload it so people can find it. Yeah, so even if this is another kind. I wanted to show you these two projects, and you will see it when you check it out, that this one has a very long payback period because it's a small buildings, and this one has a very short period because it was a very large building compared to what you have here. But in Hungary, this is not the largest. And so, yeah, this is my finish. The first one is probably the most important. If you don't reduce the cost, then energy efficiency is not going to make sense, and then you can't pay it back, or it's going to be very expensive, or the state has to intervene, and then you cannot do many more projects. Sorry for being late. Thank you.
It is just amazing how you navigated Latvian presentation.
Oh yes, it was. It
wow.
took me a few seconds. Sorry.
No, it was perfect. Perfect. One question: you were a little skeptical on the not the quality of the way of renovating the buildings of those 30% of Hungarian renovated buildings. But the question is, what are the key aspects of Hungarian success in renovation and energy efficiency? So you said, yeah, it should be cost saving. What else?
In the one that I was skeptical about was the UK one, because I know it. Yeah,
right.
so in the UK, when they say energy efficiency, it can mean, for example, just changing a light bulb, changing the heating system, and that's it. You don't do anything else. So they are very broad in their definition. This is a big problem across Europe, that we don't have, no matter what the EU is saying, there is no standardized language for energy efficiency, and there is no, it can mean anything. But in Hungary, the greatest reasons why we were able to achieve such a big result compared to the fact that we are from Central Eastern Europe is is the fact that we did it in a very market-based. SME companies that are acting as one-stop shops, they have very low overcosts, and so they can do much more. They have very little office costs. They don't...
Small and medium companies.
Yes, very small. You have to imagine then that these kind of companies, they are like what we call a BT, which is like 2 people or 3 people. Yeah, and so they are doing a lot of things. So they keep the contact with the banks. They are writing the application for the bank. They are doing a lot of things. But because they are very small, their costs are very small. And because there are many of them, they can do a lot of projects over the years.
So they are acting like one-stop agencies?
You could call it that, but it's a market-driven one-stop agency because it's driven by the contract that you are signing with the house, with the bank, when you are writing the application, if there is some support system, etc. So because it's market-driven, it means that these companies live from this, and they cover their costs from about 1.5% of the investment cost. This is how they cover it in general. And so, for example, when they have very big projects, because we have buildings in Hungary that have 1,000 apartments, yeah, it's not that rare. So they are big like a village. And if you have such a big apartment, if you get 1% of that, that is a lot of money for you as a small company. And so you have the incentive to do it. This is why I said that it's very market-based. It's not the state or the local authority or some kind of public institution that is doing the hard job. It's little companies that are doing it. And that's the reason why Hungary is so strange and unique in this regard.
That's why you're here.
Yes.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you very much.
Thank you.